So our next speaker, Poszytek, I hope I'm Poszytek, from steam engine to blockchain. Wow, how technological progress has been influencing and the competencies we need.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I think that it's going to be a challenge for me to present after those first three marvelous presentations. But at least maybe I can catch up somehow with a provoking title at the beginning. Okay, so actually what I'm going to talk about is how we are going to educate our students for the future. Somebody said that we cannot educate them for now, for the present, because then it would be pointless and useless. We are actually facing dramatical changes in our societies due to technological development. So the question is how to educate our students so that they can cope with the future challenges and how they can live in a future world. So the questions that need to be answered is what features education for future should have, or simply what kinds of future competences we should develop. What future competences our students should develop and they have to be prepared for this new era which is coming. Next question, do our students actually acquire these competences? And does education for future change our understanding of quality of teaching? So during the second presentation today, the first two revolutions, industrial revolutions, were already mentioned. Actually, now we are facing, or we are entering the era of the so-called the fourth industrial revolution. So the first one, obviously, the beginning of, the introduction of the steam engine, and as it was said before, the replacement of human muscles with a machine. The second industrial revolution was the introduction of the electricity. So if you reflect what dramatical changes were introduced with those inventions. So with the electricity, we could not only process the things mechanically, but actually we could start working in shifts. And then the third revolution, which was the introduction of the computers. So I will tell you something about this from my personal experience. So how dramatically, for example, the communication between people changed. I remember that the first time I got my email address and I could communicate with the whole of the world, actually for free, without any limits, was 1991. And I'm coming from the post-communist country, from Poland, so 1991. But in 1989, two years before, actually we got the freedom from the communists. So in that time, it was just a matter of a few years. At that time, actually, we couldn't communicate with people very freely. Even if you wanted to make a phone call, international phone call, actually it was monitored, it was censored, and so on and so on. And just two years after, I just got my first email. So that was a dramatical change, not only from the point of view of technology, but also from the point of view of the in a broader context, in the context of the social life as well. And now we are facing the fourth industrial revolution, which means that actually everything is going to be digitalized. If we'd like to define it, obviously I'm not going to talk in depth about the fourth industrial revolution. I'm only mentioning it because I want to draw a certain context for the education for future. But if you'd like to have a map and to define the fourth industrial revolution, then such notions come into mind like robots, Internet of Things, simulation, cybersecurity, system integration, cloud computing, 3D, big data, augmented reality. And obviously, these notions we are quite familiar with those notions, so there's no problem with it. But if we go more into detail with this Revolution 4.0, as it is called, and if you look at these things, actually every day in the newspaper, on TV, you can hear about these things. This is our reality. These things are influencing our reality to a very high degree. But the question is there a person here who could say that knows quite a lot about all these things? Anyone? Okay, only one person. Okay. These are the things which are going to impact our lives really very heavily. I'm not an expert in this, and I cannot tell you about all these things. Anyone knows what digital twin is? Some of you, yes? A digital twin, this is just one of the examples from here, from this list. The digital twin is a digital representation of a living or non-living thing in the cyber world. So like, for example, an avatar of somebody or something like this. So this is our reality for the next years to come, and it turns out that we actually don't know how far it is going to impact our lives and change our lives. And we have to educate our students to live in this reality. So what will be the consequences of this so-called Revolution 4.0? So, as we said, the first industrial revolution, the human muscles were replaced by the machines. But now the question is that probably the work performed by humans will disappear. I mean, it will be performed only by the machines, by robots, and by artificial intelligence. So is it the end of work, or maybe we are going to redefine the work in a new way? The next very important question is how to maintain the sense of life in a world without work. And one more fundamental question, can one be happy in a world without work? So are we preparing our students for the world of work, or are we preparing them for something else? Are we ready for this? Maybe some of you read in the media about the Finnish example, the example from Finland. A few years ago, they introduced a welfare system in their country that if you decided not to work, you just got 800 euros per month. Something like a minimal guaranteed salary. And actually, after I don't remember how long, it was something like after 2 years, they closed the system because they made some kind of evaluation, and it turned out that it's not bringing any good to the society. Because some of the optimists say that if all the work will be done by the machines, by robots, by whatever, we will have time to participate in a cultural life. We will be able to develop ourselves, and we will be happy. But actually, if you look at how people use the technology, so actually this is a kind of thoughtless play with the tools. I remember, because I participated in this conference in March this year as well, and I was talking about also about the competences, future competences, but from the different point of view, and I was quoting some numbers from the European Commission. So those numbers, just to make it short, these numbers are that, well, in 20, 30 years, half of the jobs or the professions as we know them now will disappear totally. The new ones will be created. We don't know. We don't even know their names. But we know that 90% of these new professions or jobs will require high skills in technology. And at the same time, we also know from this data from the European Commission, from the survey, that 50% of people, especially young people in the European Commission, in the European Union, they do not know how to use technology. They do not have basic ICT skills. And I remember one of the participants, the lady from Germany, and she said, "Oh, how come your data is not correct?" Actually, it's not my data; it's the data from European Commission survey. Your data is not correct because when you look at young people or at people on trains, public transport, all of them are using iPhones and they are using the technology. It's thoughtless play with the tools. There is nothing deep behind it. If you think about using technology in terms of your work, in terms of creative use of it, many people, especially young people, don't have those skills. Okay, so what do we know? Do we know anything about the future? So one of the words that comes into mind actually, it's a big uncertainty. So we don't know actually how to prepare the students because we don't know this new reality. We don't know how the world will look like in 10 or 20 years. But but we can reflect somehow. And in 2017 there was a kind of consortium of universities from UK, and they tried to collect some knowledge and different reflections from different reports, from different workshops and conferences on how to approach further. What can we do? It was a project called Solving Future Skills Challenges. So I'm not going to talk about this in detail because it would be a very long story, but just a few quotes, just a few thought-provoking thoughts from this. So, the fourth industrial revolution could involve a revolution more comprehensive and all-encompassing than anything we have ever seen. That's the quote from World Economic Forum in Davos from 2016. The combination of multiple changes, such as through robotics, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things, will disrupt whole sectors and organizational structures and is unlikely to leave many jobs untouched. Second quote and thought, the linear model of education, employment, career will no longer be sufficient. Next one, subject-specific skills will need to be underpinned by a range of transferable skills. I will go into this in a more detail in a moment. The demand for graduates is robust, but in an uncertain environment, it is difficult to predict future demand. So, are we ready? So, all these reflections were based on certain documents and certain experiences so far. One of them is there is an index called Worldwide Educating for the Future. This index measures how universities and how different regions or countries are prepared for this education for future. And this index creates a kind of benchmark for the skills of tomorrow. And we have still quite a few other references and basic documents, like, for example, already mentioned World Economy Forum report from Davos in 2016. But we also have a report from OECD 2017, Education for the Future. We have European Principles for Enhancement Teaching and Learning. In Europe, we have Bologna process and the so-called Paris communication, and obviously we have a lot of good practice examples from all over the world. If we put it all together, there are just a few interesting recommendations or a few interesting conclusions. So the first one is that we have to be ready for permanent change. Stability is not our friend anymore. We have to search or identify relatively permanent elements of education. We have to make a very good balance between hard knowledge and soft competences. I don't know how it is here in the States, but in Europe, a lot of educational systems over the last decades faced a lot of changes and reforms, and it was claimed that actually we do not need, the education cannot be knowledge-based because this is 19th century notion. Now you can have the access to the knowledge instantly. You have the knowledge in the internet, so why should you concentrate on the knowledge? You should develop certain competences. But actually, you cannot develop those competences without a solid base. So there are some elements, some permanent elements in the knowledge that we have to identify, and we have to build on this. There are certain universal things on which we should build on. And obviously, but we have to add those soft competences. So obviously we have to address the needs of labor market, but that has also been the notion, very kind of buzzword, especially in Europe over the last decade or 2 decades or so. But actually, if we don't know how this world of the labor market will look like, then we have to question it a bit. So, skills directly connected with a profession or a certain job are subject to change. They are needed, obviously, but they are not sufficient. But some skills or competences are relatively permanent, and these are transversal or social skills. There is a very long list. There are a lot of models of this, especially if you look at the list of those reference documents I quoted on a previous slide. So these documents provide different models, but what is common is lifelong learning, criticism, auto-criticism, problem solving, being innovative, cooperation, communication, and so on. I'm not going to go through all these models, but I think that I will concentrate on the model provided by the Davos report. I will show it in a moment. But still, if you think about the core of it, that would be the model of 3C, cooperation, communication, creativity. This will always apply because there are also pessimists among us, and they say, okay, we are talking about technological progress, we are talking about this kind of development and a future world, which we do not know how it will look like. But there are pessimists who say that, well, why talking about this? We don't know, maybe in 20 or 30 years, we will live in shacks. There are changes in, climate changes, which may affect, well, the impact of those changes may be dramatical in the future. For example, I don't know, people will fight for water, or there will be big migrations of people. It won't be possible to live in southern parts of the world anymore. We don't know how it will look like. There are some scientists in Australia, they say that in 2031, I don't know why 31, not 30, but okay, 31, our civilization will disappear because there is a research claiming that the Earth is not going to sustain the life as it is now with all this technological process and with all these things that we are doing to our globe. So we don't know, but still whatever it is, if we progress, if the technological progress is going on and on, or if it's going to, if there's going to be a big disaster, ecological disaster or whatever, and we are going to live in shacks, this model will apply always, because we will have to live with each other somehow. But the model I would like to show is the model coming from the World Economic Forum in Davos. So the 21st century skills. So as you can see, it somehow refers to the traditional model of competences, which is actually the knowledge, skills, and the attitude. But actually, the wording here is slightly different. So instead of the knowledge, you have foundational literacies. So we have literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy, ICT literacy, financial literacy, cultural and civic literacy. Actually, when I was here in March, I was describing all these elements in detail, so I'm not going to do it anymore. You can just make a reference in the article. And then, so that's the first component. This is this hardcore knowledge that we have to build on, I mentioned before. And then you have competencies like critical thinking, like creativity, like communication, like collaboration or cooperation. And then we have character qualities, like curiosity, initiative, persistence, adaptability, leadership, and so on. Actually, when you look at all the articles from the journal, the articles of the presentations that were presented over those last years during those conferences organized by Professor Kalaos, actually you can find a lot of examples touching upon those elements. Now, this is the same model presented graphically in another way. So you still have the same notions, competences, and character qualities of the students. But what is most important here, how should we teach all these skills? And still, in the middle, you have all those notions that we've been discussing over the years during those conferences here, and obviously in other places. So encourage play-based learning, break down learning into smaller coordinated pieces, create a safe environment for learning, develop a growth mindset, foster nurturing relationships, allow time to focus, foster reflective reasoning and analysis, offer appropriate praise, guide child's discovery of topics. Obviously, most of them also apply to students, not only to children. Help children take advantage of their personality and strength. Actually, it was also somehow touched upon by the previous, this notion by the previous presentation. Provide appropriate challenges, offer engaged caregiving, provide clear learning objectives, targeting explicit skills, and use a hands-on approach. This is just a list of the things and notions that we've been discussing here for the last few conferences. Okay, so since we are running out of time, instead of a thank you slide, I'm coming back to the first slide. So I think that if we come back to the first question, what features Education for Future should have, or what future competences we should develop, well, more or less I think that I have covered this topic and providing that we have half an hour for this, that I have provided some answers to this. But the second question, do our students acquire these competences? So actually, all of us should answer this question individually. Whatever the model, whatever the map we use, whatever the metrics or the format, then we have to reflect on our own. The same applies to the third question: does education for future change our understanding of quality of teaching? I think there is a link here to the second presentation, because we have the professor mentioned, Professor Appleby mentioned about the system about the coordinator of the system and how they interact. Obviously, by nature, we somehow unconsciously adapt ourselves to the new situation, and we somehow address those issues. But if we reflect deeper on this, maybe we could foster and make this process faster, especially that the world is changing faster and faster. And as I said, we are preparing our students for the big unknown. Thank you very much anyway.